I'm Brittany, this is Xie Lian, and welcome to Gaywatch, where we watch gay things. Today we should be the second to last stream for Heaven Official's Blessing Volume 8. We've made it to the extra stories. We are currently in the second extra story at part 3 of 3. On page... Oh, no, I'm sorry, we're in the middle. We had just started part 3. So we are in the middle of page 222, actually. And it should be, I'm going to quickly reassess here, but it should be, yeah. It should take us a pretty even today and tomorrow in order to finally finish all of the main stories and be officially done with Heaven Official's Blessing as a whole. We'll get emotional when we get to it. We read for 2 hours, and we usually cover about 50 pages. 40 to 50 if I really have to, stop, absorb, or just ramble on about something. So we should be good for today and tomorrow. And then the day after that, we are still having a stream at the same time, but it's a little bit of like a debrief questionnaire. Hey, did you catch this? Oh, this on page whatever connects over to what happens 5 volumes after that, that kind of thing. We're doing that on Wednesday. That is the grand fathoming we are doing on Wednesday. Because with a series this long, I feel like it's a bit warranted, you know? Alrighty. I think we will go ahead and hop in. Let me check and see if people have hopped on. Yeah. Let me move things around real quick so that I can't see me, but can see the chat. There we are. Okay. I think I have a sneaking suspicion that we are coming up on a long-awaited moment. Frankly, that's what I'm betting. It'll be really interesting to see if that somehow doesn't happen. But I've just got my little red flags. My little red flags are going up. So we'll see if I'm right or not. We are in the middle of Xie Lian combating amnesia right now. Can't remember a lot of things, including Hua Cheng. Much to Hua Cheng's entertainment, I feel. He's having a little bit too much fun. But then again, when is he not? And of course he insists on being hot about it. So we'll see. They're headed back to, Sen Lung's place, which of course Xie Lian is not familiar with at all. So let's see. Let's find out. Sen Lung's residence was an extremely spacious, extravagant mansion. When Xie Lian entered, he thought it was almost the equal of some of the garden palaces within the greater imperial palace of Shanlei, which only further cemented the fact that Sen Lung was no ordinary man. As Xie Lian lay alone in bed that night, he tossed and turned. He was mired in a storm of outrageous, hazy dreams. He wanted to move, but someone was pinning him firmly down. The voice that whispered in his ear was sometimes a man's, sometimes a boy's. Sometimes it called him Gaga, and sometimes it called him Your Highness, as it coaxed him, Don't be afraid, Your Highness. Some key information there. It was intensely gentle, intensely evil, and all throughout he felt intensely cherished by the one he was with. Fucking stop. I'm already writing something down. Hang on. That was page 223. Woo, I've got mugs in the way. Okay, hang on. Volume 8, 223. Because that was a little obscene. Okay? That was much. That was a lot to just kick off. Xie Lian woke with a start, his clothes completely soaked with sweat. He clenched his fists and panted. Feeling both furious and powerless, he punched the bed violently and tangled his fingers in his slightly damp hair. When will I be able to forget about this? Just wait, when I catch that shameless jerk, I'll definitely... He noticed then that there was a set of clothing laid next to his pillow that he'd never seen before. Robes in his favored white color, and they were even in the style he preferred. Greatly relieved, Xie Lian hurried to the back of the room to take a quick bath. Stripped and soaking in the water, he discovered that he had a fine, thin silver chain around his neck. A crystal-clear ring hung at the end of it. He didn't know how long he'd been wearing it, but he hadn't noticed it at all. Do I have a pendant like this? He wondered. The ring was genuinely so beautiful that he stared at it, mesmerized, but that didn't mean he dropped his guard. A silver glint flashed by. "Who's there?" Xie Lian shouted. He struck the water and sent forth a splash that scattered like iron pellets, hitting the wall with resounding rat-a-tat bangs. Yet his attack didn't reveal a person, but a scimitar. He held the sturdy blade up to inspect it, incredibly confused. Suddenly, a silver line on the hilt opened like an eyelid, and the eyeball beneath started spinning. This shocked Xie Lian even further. What was this strange thing? The scimitar had a long, slender body, and it seemed almost alive. It enthusiastically tried to throw itself into Xie Lian's arms over and over. Caught off guard, Xie Lian let it succeed in its endeavor, yelping and shuddering at the cold metal pressed against him. Perhaps it was because he didn't sense any killing intent, but Xie Lian's instincts told him that this scimitar posed no danger. He didn't want to react harshly toward it, sent it beyond the clouds with a slap or anything like that, but this reluctance left him constantly and arduously trying to push it away. Anything about a Ming just immediately sends me. Just then, a red shadow flashed in and snatched up the scimitar. "So this is where you were." Xie Lian looked up to see that Sanlung was standing next to the bathing pool with the scimitar choked in his hold. Although a smile still hung upon his face, faint veins had surfaced on his forehead. He gave the scimitar a hard smack. "Didn't I say you're not allowed to be in here right now?" he admonished. "Sanlung, is that scimitar your spiritual weapon?" Xie Lian asked. Sanlung turned toward him, the veins on his forehead disappearing in an instant, and his calm, composed demeanor regained. "It's nothing but a worthless piece of crap," Sanlung said. "Gaga, your Gaga made a fool of himself. Please excuse me." Xie Lian, however, looked at him with bright eyes and immense respect. Catching the hem of Sanlung's red robe, he exclaimed, No, Sanlung Gaga, you're amazing. I can't believe you forged a spiritual weapon like this, one that possesses its own consciousness." The scimitar's eye had scrunched up after Sanlung had smacked it, its grievance plain to see, but it was set happily spinning once more by Xie Lian's praise. It tried again to sidle toward him, but Sanlung coldly gave it another smack, and it simply would not have it. It collapsed to the floor with a thud and started rolling back and forth, looking for all the world like a small child bawling after being spanked by an adult. Xie Lian could almost hear its loud crying voice, and he felt a little sorry for it. He quickly stood up. "Wait, Sanlung, let it go. Don't hit it anymore. I'm sure it was just being a little mischievous as it paid me a friendly visit. There's no need to be so hard on it." It was only after he emerged from the bathwater that he remembered he was naked. His face turned intensely red again, and he sank back down awkwardly. However, Sanlung had already turned around with artless ease and left. Xie Lian quickly climbed out of the water and changed into the new robes. He was even more grateful when he felt the superbly fine material of the underclothes. At last, he wouldn't feel so chafed anymore. When he left his room and went to the receiving hall, Sanlung was already at the head seat waiting for him. Xie Lian didn't know how Sanlung had disciplined his scimitar, but it was behaving as it hung at his waist. When it wasn't moving, it had a surprisingly cold and murderous appearance. It was hard to imagine that it had just been rolling on the ground, making a scene. Sanlung smiled as he saw Xie Lian. "You're up? Did you sleep well last night?" I don't know why I was disturbed by my dreams for the first half of the night, but the second half was fine, Xie Lian answered honestly. Maybe you were too tired, Senlong replied. The two made idle chit-chat and sparred for a few easy rounds. That was how they spent the whole day. He expected that they'd pass the time this way until Hua Cheng was available to meet him. However, when Xie Lian lay alone in bed that night, he once again had that heated, restless dream. He tossed and turned this way and that, and after he'd had enough, he jolted awake, completely drenched with sweat once again. Angry and helpless, he had to get up for some fresh air. He wanted to take a stroll to calm down, but then he suddenly heard voices coming from a house at the far side of the complex. It was Senlong's master residence. The sound insulation of the house was excellent, and the voices were quiet, but Xie Lian had keen senses and caught the noise. He held his breath and went over silently. Peering through the crack of the door, he saw Senlong sitting in the head seat inside. He held the brush and seemed to be writing. His expression was cold, completely different than it was when he was with Xie Lian. Beside him, there was a black-clad man wearing a ghost mask, who bent at the waist as he made a report in a low voice. Xie Lian didn't know why, but the man in the ghost mask had barely any presence. He could easily go completely unnoticed if one wasn't careful. The man in the ghost mask had already mostly finished his report when Xie Lian began listening, so he only caught from some scattered words here and there. That monster has been causing trouble for a long time. He might have gotten into an accident when he went out to handle prayers. This is the location I've pinpointed, and other such things. Ah, okay, so instead of granted, I was merely fond of my theory from the previous stream. But, this makes more sense, that he stumbled across, a monster's path, and it fucked him up, and now Hua Cheng is having to track down what the hell, did this to see how to fix it. That makes more actual plot sense. He was still trying to process what he'd learned when he heard Senlong say, I need to attend to him right now and can't leave. Catch that monster before tomorrow night and bring it to me. Yes, sir. Shall I leave it one last breath? The man in the ghost mask asked quietly. Senlong put down his brush and glanced at what he'd written, which he then crumpled up and tossed away, apparently dissatisfied. Leave it a few. Make it spit out what it swallowed, then crush its worthless head to dust. Make it slow and painful. His tone and his expression were both quite frightening, yet Xie Lian didn't find him repulsive or alarming. The man in the ghost mask acknowledged Senlong's order and was about to take his leave, so Xie Lian quickly dodged away and hid. When he made it back to his room, Xie Lian was even more wide awake than before. He paced back and forth, wondering, who exactly is Senlong? What is that monster he spoke of? It sounded as though some monster that had been causing havoc for a long time had swallowed something important, and Senlong was very angry about it. But he couldn't head out and smash the monster's head in because he had to stay with Xie Lian. That thought made Xie Lian feel awful. Senlong was truly treating him with the utmost courtesy. Suddenly a light turned on in his head. Why did he have to just sit around? There was no meeting Hua Cheng for a while, and he'd been wanting to do something for Senlong, his good gaga. Why not go seize that monster for him? Oh, no. No, sweetie baby sugar honey. His mind made up, Xie Lian got started immediately. He left behind a letter that says, Do not worry, Senlong gaga. Lian will be back soon, and other such things. Then he leapt out and silently left the magnificent mansion behind. The location the man in the ghost mask reported wasn't difficult to find. It was many kilometers south, inside a particular cave within a particular mountain. Xie Lian was confident that no ordinary human could match his speed, so he would definitely reach it faster than Senlong's subordinate. Sure enough, 2 hours later, he arrived at the mountain in question and charged right up, smashing and punching wildly at random, leaving wailing ghosts and spirits in his wake until he finally found the cave he was looking for. Although the monster put on quite the show by having 300 or 400 minions guarding its door against Xie Lian, there might as well have only been 3 or 4. He didn't act recklessly at first because he was worried that the opponent was formidable, but after patiently watching the cave from nearby, Xie Lian learned from the gossiping minions that the monster had been having a rough couple of days too. Yeah, Shenju went through a lot of trouble escaping from the hands of a foul cultivator. He was scared half to death. He was injured and went back to his old cave, but he fled as soon as he got there, scared shitless. Then he came here. I see. I was going to ask why he called everyone out here, so it's because he's scared of that cultivator coming after him for revenge. But he shouldn't be, you know? Shenju took a few big bites out of the guy, so he must be completely lost even if he did manage to wake up. How could he not be scared? Shenju is a great, renowned Yao, centuries old, but apparently that cultivator popped out of nowhere and smacked him silly with only a couple strikes. If the cultivator hadn't been injured somehow and given him an opening, Shenju would probably be lost to us today. Holy, where'd that random cultivator come from? How's he so strong? At that point, Xie Lian felt it was time. He emerged and strolled up to them, fully at ease, and greeted them with an amiable, hello. The minions jumped. Who are you? Where'd this little pretty boy come from? Xie Lian gave them a smile. He didn't bother explaining before he went straight for the kill, moving toward the cave as he did. Even without spiritual power, he caught many of them in simple, casual grabs, and they were tossed hundreds of meters away with equally casual throws. The minions were reduced to screaming, terrified wrecks. What's with that pretty boy? He looks so gentle, so how is he such a brute? Like he was pulling weeds along the road, Xie Lian stepped into the cave without a single obstruction. He had been prepared for a huge battle with a renowned Yao, yet when he went inside the cave, all he saw was a monster in human form, rolling around on the ground, groaning and crying in pain while clutching its stomach. At first, Xie Lian thought it was only faking it, but a closer look proved otherwise. Its stomach was massively distended, as if it swallowed something horrific. Xie Lian crouched next to it. What's wrong? The monster was probably too far gone from the pain. As soon as it saw Xie Lian, it shouted, You! Perfect timing. I don't want to eat it anymore. I don't dare to. I'll never do it again. I'll return what I've swallowed to you. I can't digest it. It can't be digested. I have my guesses, but what on earth? I think you've got the wrong person, Xie Lian said. You didn't swallow anything of mine, so what would you be returning? But the monster only writhed in agony, unable to answer. Puzzled, Xie Lian absent-mindedly wrote out a talisman, thinking it'd be best to capture and seal the monster first, but when he slapped the talisman onto the creature, to his amazement, it transformed into a ridiculous-looking round... this doll type that I can't pronounce. Budawang? I don't think the emphasis was quite around that one, but that certainly wasn't my worst attempt. With a belly much bigger than any normal doll's. Although Xie Lian was surprised, he also found it hilarious. He looked at the talisman that he had written, confused as to how the spell turned out this way. Had he made a mistake? But it wasn't a problem. The battle had been a cakewalk, and Xie Lian left the deep mountains with the early morning sunlight overhead. He tucked the doll in his sleeve and hurried back toward the city. He had finally managed to do something for Sanlong. In a cheerful mood, Xie Lian was already thinking about how he would show off the monster he'd captured to Sanlong. He told himself to tamp down on his pleased expression if he wanted Sanlong to be surprised. After an entire night of toil, his feet were tired, so Xie Lian found a random stall to sit in and got himself a bowl of free tea water. As he drank, he heard someone behind him call, Xie Lian! Xie Lian immediately put down the tea bowl. Who was so audacious as to call his name out directly in public? There were very few who could act so disrespectfully, even among the members of the royal family. Who was it who did not address him with the full awe, reverence, and respect due to him as His Royal Highness, the Crown Prince? When he looked back, he was surprised to see that the speaker was a commoner. He was walking with long strides and carrying a large wooden chest. Wait, hold up, he shouted. You forgot Xie Lian. Take him with you, too. What? So the man wasn't calling to him, but someone with the same name. But now Xie Lian was even more puzzled. Even though he'd never care about royal naming taboos or any of that, he was still shocked that someone dared to have the same name as him. But soon he learned that the Xie Lian the man spoke of wasn't a person. There was a burly man sitting near Xie Lian, and the man with the chest went to sit down beside him. I brought Xie Lian over, he said, patting the chest. Remember to bring it to the other half you worship in your house. Today. Don't dismiss it as a superstition. It'll spell great misfortune if they aren't placed together. Of course, I know that. Xie Lian couldn't hold back anymore. Excuse me. The two men looked at him, and he continued. Pardon my forwardness, but may I ask what's in the chest? Didn't I already say? It's Xie Lian, said the man. Xie Lian was confused, but isn't Xie Lian His Highness the Crown Prince? The two seemed to find him funny. No one said he's not the Crown Prince. Of course he is, the man replied. See? He opened the chest, and Xie Lian's eyes bulged. There was a small shrine within, and a dusty divine statue was venerated inside it. A cultivator dressed in white, wearing a bamboo hat on his back. He didn't recognize this idol. Xie Lian couldn't understand it at all. Are you saying that this divine statue is the Crown Prince of Xianlei, Xie Lian? Who else would it be? A crowd began to surround them. Half had been attracted by what a novelty he was. What a strange young man. You look like you're a cultivator too. How do you not know something so simple? The other half of the crowd had come to check out the divine statue. Wow, that's pretty decent. That's a pretty decent scrap immortal. Looks sufficiently depressing. Yeah, look how woeful and dejected it is. That's obviously the face of bad luck. Very good. Excellent. The worse it looks now, the better it'll look when the other one helps it break free. You'll see the results in 8 days tops. Xie Lian was completely lost. Scrap immortal? What do you mean he's a scrap immortal? Daozhong, you really are strange, the crowd replied. Xie Lian was originally a scrap collector, you know. Xie Lian wasn't someone who got angry easily, but right now he was starting to feel a little vexed. No one wanted to hear others say they were a lowly collector of junk. He shot to his feet and said darkly, Do you have something against the royal family of Xianlei? Even if you do, it doesn't seem very proper to insult the crown prince this way, does it? The crowd exchanged looks of dismay, then laughed. What are you saying? Proper by which country's standards? Xianlei fell over 800 years ago. That's a scene break. Whew. My apologies for my voice being a little bit rough. I don't know where it came from. I haven't spoken much all day. I talked no more on Sunday than I usually do, you know, when my wife and I are hanging out. So, I don't know, but it is a little bit rough now that I've sat down and started reading. My apologies, I don't know how that happened. 2 hours later, Xie Lian's mind was still spinning as he walked down the street. It was too much. Everything he'd just learned was too frightening for him. How could the kingdom of Xianlei have been destroyed? Father and mother are perfectly well. And how can they say I was the one who destroyed it? I lost a war? I destroyed my own kingdom? I was banished twice? I became a scrap collector? He went through it again and again and told himself over and over, impossible, impossible, absolutely impossible. Now, I have that Whitney Houston song from Cinderella stuck in my head. I'm going to have to look that up later. That's a great song, though, so I'm not, arguing. He wanted to convince himself that none of it was true, that some evil mastermind must be orchestrating all this. She's rude, is what she is. She's just rude. But all the vague abnormalities, the odd dialects, the odd dress, the odd architecture, even the odd function in Mu Qing, they were all telling him that this wasn't a bad dream or some sort of illusion. There was no nefarious creature that could cast such a grand and realistic spell. 800 years really had passed. How had 800 years passed? How had he ended up like this after 800 years? The kingdom of Xianlei had fallen, his parents were dead, Fengtian and Mu Qing had ascended, and he'd become a scrap collector. How had it turned out this way? It couldn't have. It shouldn't have. Xie Lian walked faster and faster until he broke out into a run, as if there were an infinite darkness on his tail, about to devour him whole. Suddenly a red shadow appeared, and a tall, slender figure stopped in front of him. Daozhong, where are you going? I've been looking everywhere for you. It was San Lung. Forever smiling, he approached and tried to take his hand, but now the sight of him made Xie Lian's hair stand on end. Don't come near me, he shouted. San Lung faltered, but retained his unbothered air. What's wrong? Clenching his hands into hard fists, Xie Lian asked coldly, "Who exactly are you? What do you want?" "I thought we had a nice conversation yesterday, and decided that those small details were no longer worth discussing." "You lied to me," Xie Lian said. After a brief silence, Sen Lung asked, "Have you already found out?" "Yes," Xie Lian said, "that the present time is 800 years later." It shouldn't have taken him this long to notice all the things that were wrong, but this man had been keeping him in the dark on purpose, which made him lose his bearings. Otherwise, how would it take him an entire day to discover the truth? San Lung took a step forward. "Your Highness." Xie Lian backed many steps away. "Don't get near me," he barked. "Take one more step and I'll hit you." His voice and body were both shaking in terror. He wasn't scared of some devilish ghost, nor was he afraid of this man who appeared both evil and divine. He was terrified of this entirely foreign world. In this world, he possessed neither pride and glory, nor loyal subordinates, nor parents who loved him, nor his kingdom, nor devotees who adored him. He had nothing, nothing, nothing. Sen Lung still took another step toward him. "Don't be afraid, Your Highness." Xie Lian's face changed when he heard him. He suddenly recalled the man in his fragmented dreams who had whispered next to his ear, "Don't be afraid." How had he not realized it? That tone and their voices were exactly the same. Xie Lian was convulsing with anger. It was you. It really was you. This man had deceived him and made him go around in circles, made him weep with gratitude, filled him with good feelings, and had him call him Gaga. The mere thought of it sent an unstoppable rage surging through Xie Lian, and he struck out. "You liar!" His strike hit San Lung squarely in the chest. But as Xie Lian tried to strike again, he found that he couldn't move a muscle. His own body had stopped him. Xie Lian didn't understand what was happening, and San Lung caught his hand amidst the confusion. Startled, Xie Lian gritted out, "Do not touch me. You liar, you lied to me. I will never trust you again. Your Highness, trust me," San Lung said gravely. Xie Lian was furious. "I won't, But in the same way he'd been unable to attack, the words, "I don't trust you," refused to pass his lips. The concern and the pain in this man's eye were real and true, without a doubt. No one who witnessed such an expression would question its sincerity. Another moment. Damn. No one who witnessed such an expression would question its sincerity. As if to isolate Xie Lian from the foreign world he so feared, Sen Lung finally pulled him into his arms. He pressed his lips to his head to brush kisses through his hair as he whispered softly and gently, "Don't be afraid, Your Highness. It's all in the past. Your Highness, you've already made it through." It was a long time before Xie Lian ceased his resistance and went slack in his embrace. Tossing aside his mortification, when Xie Lian really thought about it, the man's voice that called to him in the fragmented dreams was always extremely gentle, without a shred of coercion. As for himself, although there had certainly been pleas and weeping, he couldn't tell that he hadn't been reluctant in the least. He could tell that he hadn't been reluctant in the least. That was an important conjunction. The only reason he hadn't noticed until now was that he simply hadn't wanted to face it. Xie Lian finally understood why he couldn't help but want to trust this man at first sight. The relationship between Sen Lung and the him of 800 years later was probably not so simple. He fully gave up on fighting his body and went along with what his heart wanted. With his face buried in Sen Lung's chest, his voice was muffled when he began to speak. Sen Lung replied. Xie Lian was silent for a long time before he mumbled, Why have I suddenly forgotten everything that happened over the last 800 years? It was my fault, Sen Lung replied. 2 evenings ago, you suddenly received a prayer in the middle of the night. You left in such a hurry that I hadn't had a chance to restore your spiritual power, nor warn you that the memories would be devoured if that monster bit you. That's not your fault at all. I was the one who screwed up, Xie Lian said. Your Highness will never be a screw-up, Senlung said. Xie Lian gave an arduous smile before saying dejectedly, Then, Senlung, how did I let the kingdom of Shenlei be destroyed? He so clearly loved his people. He once even had the lofty ambition of making Shenlei last for another 1,000 years. Senlung hugged him tighter and said firmly, It isn't your fault. How did I fail? How did I become this way? Xie Lian mumbled. Who didn't want to undertake a grand enterprise that would shake the world and leave their mark on history? Maybe not 1 in a million could accomplish such a feat, but Xie Lian had always firmly believed he'd be that one. Perhaps that was why Senlung hadn't allowed him to realize that he was 800 years in the future. You didn't fail, Senlung repeated. Xie Lian shook his head. But I don't have any devotees anymore. You do. Just the thought of it made Xie Lian sad. I'm the scrap immortal, a collector of trash. I have no devotees, and no one takes me for a god. Who would respect a god who collects scraps? It was completely different from the vision he'd once had. Didn't I tell you? You have one devotee, Senlung insisted. When Xie Lian stood up, Senlung smiled at him. Your Highness, I told you that you would be able to meet Hua Cheng soon, and now you've met him. Xie Lian gazed at his face, scrutinizing him, then asked with a trace of bemusement in his voice, Senlung, when did we meet the first time? A long, long time ago, before your ascension, Hua Cheng answered. Xie Lian blinked slowly. Your Highness, perhaps the you of right now considers the you of 800 years later a failure. Maybe you're disappointed and can't accept it, Hua Cheng said. But please believe me when I say, that's not true. His bright left eye gazed at Xie Lian, and the light there was just as soft as his voice. You saved me. I've always watched you. There are countless people who have seen more success than you, but none of them saved me the way you did, and none of them could possibly accomplish all that you have. You have no idea how much courage you've given me, or how you allowed me to become who I am today. In my heart, you are the only God. And you will forever be my most devoted believer, Xie Lian said. It was a long while before Xie Lian took the monster's doll out of his sleeve. It seemed like he made up his mind about something. Was this the monster that swallowed my memories? Hua Cheng took it from his hands. So it was your Highness who busted into its new lair. Xie Lian nodded. We'll have to start here if I want my memories restored, won't we? Sitting in Hua Cheng's palm, the doll opened its mouth wide. A scatter of sparkles flew from the opening like fireflies, dancing as they fluttered around Xie Lian. Your Highness, if you touch them, you can retrieve your memory of the past 800 years, Hua Cheng said. Xie Lian reached toward the sparkling lights, yet right before his hand could touch them, he paused. Restoring 800 years of memories would be like traveling through them all, like reliving everything. The agony of his heart being pierced 100 times, the humiliation of utter defeat, the fury of powerlessness. Although he knew the journey would span only a fleeting instant, his fingertips still trembled. Hua Cheng stood behind him. It made Xie Lian feel like he was leaning against a solid, supportive wall. Don't be scared, Your Highness, Hua Cheng said from above him. Xie Lian tilted his head and Hua Cheng's arm wrapped around his waist. No matter how long it takes, I will always wait for you. We will meet again, believe me. Yeah, they would meet again. Xie Lian once again reached toward those sparkles. Dots of twinkling light melted into the tips of his fingers. Brightness slowly enveloped his vision as if something hot was approaching. Before the light reached him, however, Xie Lian said to Hua Cheng, I'm so happy I met you. The sparkles entered his body and he vanished. Xie Lian fell forward slowly, and Hua Cheng caught him. It was a while before Xie Lian regained consciousness. As soon as he opened his eyes, Hua Cheng asked quietly, Gaga? A warm smile gradually bloomed on Xie Lian's face, and he reached out to cup Hua Cheng's cheek. We meet again. Hua Cheng smiled too. I did say that you should believe me. Xie Lian sighed. Does this count as waiting for each other another 800 years? Didn't I say that I will always wait for you, no matter how long it takes? But Hua Cheng pulled Xie Lian to his feet. As the two stood face to face, Hua Cheng squeezed his hands and smiled. Right now, I never want to be separated again. Not for another minute. The past couldn't be changed. 800 years ago, the 17-year-old Xie Lian, darling of the heavens, didn't know what the future had in store for him. Fate had given him 2 doors, and he opened them both, the awe-inspiring first impression upon the grand avenue of divine might, and the meeting of the evil and the divine at Yinian Bridge. After that, he would be alone and powerless in the roaring waves of desperate times and struggle through long, torturous centuries. Pain, anger, disappointment, hatred, despair, madness, his heart would become dead as ashes. And then it would be rekindled. But that, of course, was all in the past. That's not even the scene break. That's not even the scene break. That's not even the chapter end. Oh, okay. We're literally just like a page and a half away from the chapter end. All right. Welcome back, Gaga. See? I told you we would meet again. I didn't lie to you. Xie Lian shot Hua Cheng a look. Oh, really? Of course, Hua Cheng assured with a smile. When have I ever lied to your highness? After all, as your Gaga. Xie Lian reached into Hua Cheng's robes and pulled out a sheet of paper. Lian has no way of repaying Sen Lung Gaga for his care, he read aloud. Thus, I am willing to do everything within my meager power to alleviate my Gaga's worries. I will take a temporary leave. Do not worry, Sen Lung Gaga. Lian will return soon. Hua Cheng quirked an eyebrow, not saying a word as he stood with his hands folded behind his back. Once Xie Lian finished reading, he quirked an eyebrow too, in imitation of him. Sen Lung Gaga, good Gaga. Oh, you're good, aren't you? Hua Cheng burst out laughing. Isn't Gaga already aware of just how good I am? Xie Lian flushed a little. I don't know what you're talking about, he replied vaguely. Anyway, you've crossed the line over the last couple of days. Reflect on your behavior. Gaga, you can't be like this, Hua Cheng said in a stern tone. I've been nothing but courteous for the past 48 hours. It's been very hard holding myself back. How are you courteous? Xie Lian countered. You were clearly having a great time messing with him. When he remembered how he'd spent the last 2 days, regressed into an innocent, naive, foolish, spoiled, pampered little 17-year-old idiot who got played by Hua Cheng over and over, Xie Lian could barely face himself. He groaned, putting a hand over his forehead. In a serious tone, Hua Cheng added, It's true. Even if he got yelled at by Gaga and called a despicable, shameless, perverted jerk, Sen Lung has no complaints and no regrets. Gaga, if you're unhappy, you can yell at him again. Sen Lung doesn't mind. Xie Lian couldn't bear to listen anymore. He began to creep away, his hand still over his forehead, and by the time Hua Cheng turned back to him, he was gone. Gaga, don't run away. All right, I screwed up, Gaga. Stop with the Gaga already, jeez. And that's like the ending moment of the chapter. Nerds. Dorks. Both of them. Oh my god. No. We're on page 243. And it's time for a new extra story. This is the third one out of 5. And, oh yeah, since that one didn't take too long to wrap up. Oh, this one's pretty short. Okay, cool. This one's pretty short. The next one's not too much longer. We might get through 3 and 4 and then have 5 for tomorrow. Something like that. We might get through 4. It depends. Again, I don't know what that means because I haven't read these. But for anybody who's read the 5 stories, may then have a better idea of what we might actually get through today and what we might read tomorrow. This one, page 243, I think I said that. Technically, chapter 138. This 3rd story is called The Ghost King's Bedtime Story. Huh. Alright. Also, I love that I was wrong about that. I was sure that the previous story was totally setting them up for some kind of, like, amnesic, out-of-body sexual experience of some sort. I mean, don't put it past her, right? But it's interesting that that didn't happen. So the jury's still out on whether or not we're getting that kind of thing with these stories. So, Hua Cheng had fallen ill. Although it was a minor illness, how very curious it was that ghost kings could even get sick. When Xie Lian returned to Thousand Lights Temple to check up on Hua Cheng's calligraphy practice as usual, he was highly concerned to find him slightly feverish. He pushed Hua Cheng onto the altar. Yes, since there were no divine statues in the way, the two of them often took a tumble on the temple's spacious altar, then only got more worried after he felt his cheeks and forehead. There's something about the details that she chooses to reveal about the way and where that these two bang that just... It's so deeply satisfying. It's why I said in a previous live stream, if we don't actually get a sex scene, I'm ultimately okay with it. Because she keeps dropping these bombs that characterizes their sex life. And it's so much fun that if we don't get an explicit sex scene, I'm kind of okay with it. Anyway, and like that came out of nowhere in the middle of a sentence. I'm fine. Oh no. You're so hot. Hua Cheng laughed. I always burn hot at the sight of you, Gaga. Oh my god. If you keep touching me, I'll get bothered, too. Well, heaven forbid. Xie Lian blinked, then hastily tried to pretend he was blushing out of anger. Naughty even when you're sick. What did I say? Hua Cheng protested, acting innocent. I'm very well behaved. Gaga, stop worrying. A small thing like this is nothing to be concerned about. But Xie Lian could hear that his voice was deeper and scratchier than usual, and he could see the slight fatigue that colored his brow. Get some rest then, Xie Lian said. I'll keep you company here for the next few days until you're better. Oh no, okay, there's a lot going on in this art that I'm guessing needs to be characterized by what's on the actual page. So hang on, because I don't think this will make any sense until we read it. He gathered the stationery for writing practice and brought it to the altar. Hua Cheng patted the spot next to him. Is Gaga not coming up to join me? But if he went up there, when would Xie Lian have a chance to come back down? At that point, they could forget about doing anything else for a while. No, Xie Lian declined politely. My Sanlong has overworked himself. No, Hua Cheng laughed. How could Sanlong ever be afraid of hard work when it comes to working Gaga hard? I can't take this. I can't take these two. These two are just... No. They are just peak... I mean... They are disgusting. Xie Lian ignored him, refusing to participate in his games. Instead, he focused on putting together a calligraphy copybook. Hua Cheng flipped onto his side and stared at him, one hand propping up his cheek, still making him hot about everything. His intense, rapt gaze always made Xie Lian blush, no matter how many times he was the subject of it. Sanlang, look at the copybook, not at me, chided Xie Lian, sounding uncomfortable. Hua Cheng sighed. Gaga, truth be told, just the sight of this stuff makes my head hurt. But since you're the one who wrote it for me, I can't bear to look away. Maybe staring at copybooks too much is the cause of my current condition. What condition is that? Xie Lian questioned. Hua Cheng snickered. It's better for my health to look at you instead, Gaga. You're a far better sight to stare at than copybooks. Maybe I'll heal from exposure to you alone. Feeling helpless, yet amused, Xie Lian put down the brush and shook his head. Why do you spout so much nonsense these days? Nothing serious ever comes out of that mouth of yours. All right, fine, I'll get it. We'll go with what you want. No more copybooks. What shall we do instead? Oh my god, and here's this art, okay? Here's this art. You know? If I can get it to focus, kind of. There we go. Ish. Getting my face out of here real quick. We don't have to do anything, Hua Cheng said. Just keep me company like this, and I'll be better in no time. Xie Lian felt Hua Cheng's forehead again. Although he was a handsome man, the way he was whining made Xie Lian think of a red-cheeked child peeking out of his nest of warm blankets in the winter. Affection and tenderness filled him at the thought. After some consideration, he said, How about this? I happened to collect something interesting today. He rummaged through his sleeve and fished out an item. It's an old book someone threw away. I was planning to flip through it sometime, Xie Lian said. Why don't I read you a few stories? The little book in his hand was very old and ragged, with yellowing pages that gave it a strange air of scholarship. Others must have flipped through it countless times before. But Hua Cheng said, No. Why not? Xie Lian asked, curious. Books like that are always full of tall tales people spun about the other heavenly officials, Hua Cheng replied lazily, and I already know everything about their ancient, sordid trifles. None of that nonsense interests me, so why would I trouble Gaga to tell me about it? That was true. Hua Cheng knew all the terrible secrets of countless powerful figures from across the realms. If Gaga must read something, why not pick another subject? Hua Cheng said. Your own story, for example. That suggestion made Xie Lian chuckle. Is there anyone who knows more about me or has seen more of me than you? Tell me even more, Hua Cheng pleaded. I want to hear it. I can't hear enough about you. Jesus. He was being completely serious. No, we are aware. If there's one thing we're aware of, it is that Hua Cheng is serious when talking about Xie Lian. Xie Lian could tell. He carefully brushed away the strands of hair spilling over Hua Cheng's cheek. As he did so, he inadvertently glanced at the book and exclaimed in amazement, Sanlang, I think this book is about us. Is it? Xie Lian flipped through the book again. It is. It's filled with stories about the great red-robed ghost king and the scrap immortal. That's you and me, right? That piqued Hua Cheng's interest. Oh? What kind of stories? Xie Lian was also curious to learn about the tales that common people had crafted about him and Hua Cheng, so he opened the storybook and started reading aloud. Once upon a time, there was a great ghost king who loved to wear red. Although the great ghost king was a powerful man and possessed mountains of gold and silver, he was very unhappy. That was because he was very lonely and yearned for a wife. Xie Lian snorted and laughed aloud, finding it a little hard to continue. Is the lonely ghost king waiting in an empty nest? Hua Cheng quirked an eyebrow. It's not wrong. I get very lonely when Gaga isn't around. Xie Lian felt his cheeks go hot and kept reading. They've literally found fan fiction of themselves, and they're going to read the fan fiction of themselves. There we go. There's the term I'm looking for. Canon fan fiction. Okay. Impeccable. Amazing. 12 out of 10. I love this so much. My face hurts from smiling. Whew, okay. It goes into the actual fic. We are about to read the... Okay. Once upon a time, there was a great ghost king who loved to wear red. Although the great ghost king was a powerful man and possessed mountains of gold and silver, more than a lifetime's worth of fortune, he was very unhappy. That was because he was very lonely and yearned for a wife. Although he waited for centuries, there was no sign of his beloved. So he went to request the guidance of an old immortal who was highly skilled in the art of divination. The great ghost king asked the old immortal, "Where is my wife?" The old immortal told him, "You and the one you are waiting for will unite in a marriage upon a mountain. Your wife will come riding in a marriage sedan and wearing red bridal robes." The great ghost king was determined to find his wife, so he went to that mountain and waited patiently. Meanwhile, in a place far, far away, there was a scrap immortal. The scrap immortal was a collector of scrap, which was why he was the poorest of the heavenly officials. He was even poorer than many mortals. However, despite his extreme poverty, he was very kind. One day, on his way home from collecting scraps, the scrap immortal saw a girl crying by the roadside. The scrap immortal asked the girl, "Miss, why do you weep so?" "I am about to marry," the girl replied tearfully, "but I must cross a mountain on the day I depart, and a ghost groom lives on that mountain. He steals brides who pass by. Only a few have ever been saved from his clutches. I will be taken and killed." The scrap immortal was sympathetic to her plight and resolved to rid the people of this evil. He decided to marry in that woman's stead to vanquish the monster. The scrap immortal had two good friends. Because one was ornery and one was petty, they were called the ornery immortal and the petty immortal. As they fought each other with their fists, they explained to him, "The ghost groom is a great ghost king with a very bad temper, and he is very sly. He detests gods. If you attempt to capture him, you will definitely be eaten." But the scrap immortal was adamant, and thus they built him a marriage sedan. On the day of his departure, the scrap immortal wore beautiful wedding robes borrowed from Lady Windmaster in order to disguise himself as a bride. He mounted the wedding sedan and was carried up the mountain by his two friends, who fought and attacked each other the entire way. Wicked gales bellowed in the pitch-black night. When the wedding sedan reached the top of the mountain, there was no one left by the scrap immortal's side. He waited and waited, waited and waited, until his groom finally arrived. When the scrap immortal lifted his bridal veil, he was surprised to discover that the great ghost king was an exceptionally handsome young man. Even more surprising was that the young groom was very polite. He was well-mannered, gentle, and considerate. He did not remove his human skin to reveal a monster's true form, nor did he force the scrap immortal to do anything untoward. He was nothing like the horrible great ghost king of legend. The mountain was immense indeed, and the great ghost king brought the scrap immortal to his lair within its depths. "From this moment onward, I am your husband, and you are my beloved wife," the great ghost king said to the scrap immortal. "This entire mountain belongs to me, and now to you as well. You can roam wherever you please. However, remember this. On the other side of the mountain, there are 2 houses that you must never enter. Why not? Asked the Scrap Immortal. His groom, the great Ghost King, answered thus, That is my secret. There is no need for you to know. However, it will be impossible for you to enter the houses, even if you wish to do so. A barrier is installed at each gate, and you must possess something of mine before you can cross. What is that something? Asked the Scrap Immortal. The great Ghost King answered, One house hides filthy trash. To open its door, you must use something of mine found on me by touch, something that is copious in amount. The other house hides a formidable spiritual weapon. To open its door, you must use something of mine not found on me by touch, something that is burning. Naturally, the Scrap Immortal did not listen. Although he pretended to be compliant and docile in front of the great Ghost King, the Scrap Immortal snuck off to the other side of the mountain as soon as he left, leaping and flying across walls and roofs. Sure enough, he heard terrifying screams and cries for help coming from the house that hid the filthy trash. The Scrap Immortal suspected that this was where the missing brides were being confined. Thus, he decided to steal something of the great Ghost King's to open the mysterious house. But what was the something he needed to steal? The great Ghost King had a head of long, shiny, jet-black hair, which was sometimes loose and at other times tied up crookedly. The first plan the Scrap Immortal devised was to steal a few strands every day. And so he asked, May we sleep in the same room? Of course, the groom replied politely. We are married. Thus they moved into the same room. Although they slept in the same bed, the Scrap Immortal refused to allow his groom to strip him of his clothing. Because of this, the great Ghost King also respectfully refrained from attempting to touch him. However, the Scrap Immortal soon discovered that not a single strand of hair fell from his groom's head. There was not one loose hair to be found, no matter how many times he brushed his groom's hair in the morning, and before they went to bed at night, none on his pillow, the bed, the floor, or the comb. Now this was becoming a headache. The Scrap Immortal took up a sword, hoping to cut a lock of the great Ghost King's hair in secret while he slept. However, the great Ghost King was exceptionally alert, and his eyes shot open as soon as the Scrap Immortal drew near him. Even though he had been caught red-handed, the Scrap Immortal remained calm. To escape the great Ghost King's suspicion, he immediately cut off a lock of his own hair and gifted it to him. The great Ghost King was elated to receive it. The clever Scrap Immortal soon came up with another idea. He asked the great Ghost King, May I kiss you? Of course, his groom replied in delight, We are married. Thus the Scrap Immortal embraced his ghost groom and kissed him hard for a long time. When at last he'd captured a bit of his groom's taste, he quickly shut his mouth and ran to the other side of the mountain. But when he got there, he discovered that this method wouldn't work. He needed a copious amount of the something, and what he had taken wasn't enough. No matter how he tried, he still could not enter. The Scrap Immortal was dejected. He had thought that stealing something found on the great Ghost King would be an easy task. He never expected it to be so difficult. The Scrap Immortal thought of his good friend Lady Windmaster, and thus paid a visit to the Temple of Wind and Water. How do I get a copious amount of something that is found on the great Ghost King? The Scrap Immortal asked Lady Windmaster. Lady Windmaster answered, Ha! Easy! Transform into a woman, and consummate your marriage with him. Done! The Scrap Immortal shook his head, for his cultivation method decreed that his spiritual power would be greatly damaged should he lose his virginity. Lady Windmaster's way was no way at all. Just then Lord Watermaster returned and happened to hear what the lady had said. Outrageous, he barked angrily. How could you say such indecorous words? And whenever he got angry, Lord Watermaster crushed people to death with money, so the Scrap Immortal quickly fled. As he ran, he thought of his 2 other good friends, Ornery Immortal and Petty Immortal. He decided to ask them what he should do. Ornery Immortal and Petty Immortal were brawling again. As they fought, they told him some incredible news. Because too many people had gone missing, all the heavenly officials would soon attack the mountain together to apprehend the great Ghost King. This information shocked the Scrap Immortal, and he became sick with worry. After living with the Ghost King for many days now, he did not think he would commit such terrible deeds. Perhaps there was a misunderstanding. Perhaps some other creature was the one who had imprisoned those brides. However, since the Scrap Immortal was very poor and had no status, no one listened to him. The Scrap Immortal was frantic. If the truth wasn't uncovered soon, the great Ghost King might be attacked by the heavenly officials. With no other options, the Scrap Immortal ran back and asked the great Ghost King, "Excuse me, can we consummate our marriage?" "Of course," his groom answered with a broad smile. "We are married." And thus the Scrap Immortal and the great Ghost King consummated their union. During the act, the Scrap Immortal held on tightly to the great Ghost King for fear he wouldn't give him copious amounts of the important something. I love fan fiction. Can you give all of it to me? Can you give it to me many times? "Of course," his groom replied gently and considerately, "if that is what you wish." And the Scrap Immortal said, "I do." Thus, the clever Scrap Immortal received what he had been seeking, something of the great Ghost King's that he had found on him by touch and in copious amounts. The next day, carrying the something I'm too fucking beside myself. The next day, carrying the something he'd begged for from the great Ghost King, the Scrap Immortal went to the house that hid the filthy trash. This time, he was finally able to enter. The moment he opened the door, the Scrap Immortal found many filthy, disheveled corpses discarded inside. Some had already decayed and become nothing but bones. The bodies were dressed in wedding robes. They were probably the missing brides. Hopes dashed, the Scrap Immortal was both shocked and sad. When he turned his head, he was surprised to discover that there was someone standing behind him. The great Ghost King had come before he noticed. The Scrap Immortal was shocked. He recalled what Ornery Immortal and Petty Immortal had told him, that the great Ghost King was very sly and that he detested gods. The Scrap Immortal had now lost his spiritual power. Could the great Ghost King have seen through his identity? Had he been lying to him all this time? Angry and hurt, the Scrap Immortal fled, running faster with every step, yet he ran so fast that he spilled what the great Ghost King had given him, and he was stopped by the barrier at the front of the house. The great Ghost King caught up with the Scrap Immortal and captured him in his arms. He then told the whole story at last. As it turned out, the great Ghost King didn't catch and eat anyone. He was only on this mountain to wait for his fated special someone. One day, he was out on a stroll when he came across a wedding escort party. Terrified, the groom ran off on his own and left behind his weeping bride, who was frozen in place with fear. The great Ghost King hadn't intended to cause trouble, but the bride declared that she no longer wanted to marry a man like that. She left to seek a new life instead of going back from whence she came. Similar incidents happened again and again, and the Ghost King decided that he would stay and test the soon-to-be wedded while he waited for his fated special someone. If a groom dared to step forward and protect his bride from the forces of evil, then the great Ghost King would not push the matter further and would allow them to pass. If a despicable groom pushed his bride in front of a monster's gaping maw to buy time for his own escape, then he would be captured and locked inside the house that stored trash. Because of many of those despicable grooms were wicked in nature, they would often attempt to kill each other. Eventually, all that remained of them were piles of white bones. They were the corpses that the Scrap Immortal had seen. As for their brides, some had returned home, some had eloped with lovers and escaped to distant lands, and some had started their own families with a different match. The great Ghost King said, "I waited for you for centuries, Gaga, and you have finally arrived." With the misunderstanding cleared up, the two embraced each other. In order to leave the house, the great Ghost King gave the Scrap Immortal more of his something in copious amounts. I'm sorry, that's my new favorite euphemism. That is my new favorite euphemism. Give him more of something in copious amounts. I... Whew. Just then, rumbling sounded from the skies. The heavenly officials had been wary of the great Ghost King for a long time, so they had seized this chance to launch an attack. The Scrap Immortal charged out, swinging at random, and beat back a wave of heavenly officials. However, the entire mountain had collapsed from the officials' barrage, and the great Ghost King was buried beneath it. The mountain was enormous, and the Scrap Immortal tried desperately to brace it upon his shoulders for fear that the great Ghost King would be crushed completely. It suddenly occurred to him that there was another mysterious house he had yet to open, one that hid a formidable spiritual device that could surely push the great mountain away. When he rushed to the cave where the house was located, he was surprised and delighted to find the great Ghost King was standing inside, perfectly fine and whole, and even stronger than before. The two broke out of the mountain and beat back the heavenly officials who had come to cause trouble. At the end of it all, they sat atop the summit side by side to watch the clouds and stars left in the fleeing god's wake. The Scrap Immortal asked his groom, "Didn't you say that, in order to enter the house hiding the filthy trash, I needed something found on you by touch, and in copious amounts?" But the house that hid the spiritual weapon could only be entered with something not found on you by touch, that was burning. Wearing a happy smile, the great Ghost King said, "Yes, but didn't Guga have that something all along?" It dawned on the Scrap Immortal. The burning something was the ardent heart with which the great Ghost King loved him. Thus the Scrap Immortal and the great Ghost King happily went to consummate their marriage once more, never to part again. Xie Lian was speechless. Xie Lian remained speechless. Even now that the story was done, Xie Lian was still in shock. "What the heck is this?" he said, incredulous. "Isn't this adaptation way over the line? No. What the heck was this nonsense? How is it appropriate for a storybook?" Meanwhile, Hua Cheng had already fallen over on the bed, laughing. "This isn't right at all," Xie Lian exclaimed, completely baffled. "What is this even supposed to be based on? The incident at Mount Yujun? This isn't how it happened at all. It's completely twisted. And what if a child got their hands on this kind of story? That'd be inappropriate, wouldn't it? Who wrote this? And what's with all these characters who sound familiar but just slightly off?" While the story in the book appeared sweet and innocent at first glance, like a child's bedtime story, upon closer inspection, the plot was incredibly over the top. It was even more depraved than an ordinary spicy story. Yet there was a peculiar sort of sentimentality to the conclusion, and Xie Lian wondered if there was something wrong with him for feeling moved by it. Hua Cheng chimed in with his own thoughts. It's not entirely twisted. Some parts are correct, at least. For example, I certainly do call you Gaga, and it certainly was me who went to receive your wedding sedan. And on the night we consummated our marriage, you certainly did." Xie Lian had thought he'd built up a thick skin after all these years, yet he still constantly flushed bright red in front of Hua Cheng. "How did they know about something like that?" Xie Lian exclaimed. "And aside from that, it was all wrong." Wait. No. I'm misunderstanding. Although he knew it was normal for there to be leagues of differences between folk tales and their factual origins, after countless adaptations and rewrites, strange results were hardly unexpected. Seeing it for himself still shocked him to the extreme. No, I'm not. I'm not understanding that correctly. I'm not. Because there's no way I'm understanding that correctly. They did not bang all the way back in like volume 1. That's not a thing that happened. I could not possibly be understanding that correctly. If I am, I'm throwing that. Yeah, okay. Cool. See that yeah, that's what I thought. I was like there's no way. For a split second I was like, "Wait, did that?" But no. Couldn't be that. In that they are now married. Why, yes, of course. I've completely lost my place. 1 second. There had been several points where he'd been too mortified to keep reading, but Hua Cheng had forced him to continue. How aggravating. Oh, how desperately Xie Lian wanted to beat him up, but he couldn't bring himself to do it. Hua Cheng didn't find it surprising either. Obviously, someone involved must have leaked details about the incident. Some rearrangements here, some wrongful conclusions there, and a sprinkle of conjecture on the top. Voila, there you have it. You know, that's a pretty fair assessment of RPF. No more reading rubbish books like these, Xie Lian said, tossing the storybook aside. Time to rest properly. However, Hua Cheng only clapped. But it was so well written. The writer's very talented. Then he pleaded, listening to it made me feel so much better. Won't you read me another, Gaga? No, Xie Lian refused resolutely. Gaga, my head hurts. But, Gaga... All right, fine. It was rare for Hua Cheng to fall ill, even slightly, and even in the best of times, Xie Lian usually went along with his every whim and granted every single one of his wishes. How could he resist him at a time like this? Thus, as mortified as he was, he swallowed down his embarrassment and picked up that pervy little book anew. He lay down next to Hua Cheng, whose arm immediately circled around his waist as he did, and forced himself to keep reading. Once upon a time, there was a handsome young crown prince who cultivated deep in the mountains. One night, he was greeted by a mysterious guest. And that's where it ends. Whew. We are on page 259. Technically, chapter 139 for the 4th story, which is called, oh goodness, the Cave of 10,000 Gods. All right. Okay. Yeah, the cave, sure. Wait, the cave is where we saw... The cave with all the, the 10,000 blah, 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 was also the place that had all of the murals, right? Do we finally get to see a mural? I don't know. That's all I'm thinking about. Yeah, my question exactly, Mal. Okay. Laughing, Xie Lian pushed Hua Cheng off him. His crushing weight was making it hard to breathe. The heat and passion had yet to subside when something suddenly occurred to him. Oh yeah, Sen Lung, he began offhandedly, about the Cave of 10,000 Gods. We are literally, this is post, we are post-coital. She keeps teasing us with this. Hua Cheng replied lazily as he settled his arm over Xie Lian's chest. Once something in particular was in his clutches, his fingers began to twiddle and toy with it. What about it? Nothing, Xie Lian said. It just suddenly occurred to me. Are the divine statues inside that cave all right after Mount Tonglu's eruption? It would be such a shame if anything happened to them. After all, every statue in there was the product of Hua Cheng's blood, sweat, and tears, and Xie Lian loved them all. They'll be fine, Hua Cheng said. I set up a ward a long time ago. The cave would remain intact even if the entire mountain collapsed. Really? This piqued Xie Lian's interest. They must be fine then. What a relief. I want to go and take a look at them. Is that okay? Hua Cheng's expression seemed to falter for a moment before he quickly painted over it with a smile. Sure, Gaga, he agreed. You can go if you want to. What's stopping you? Let's go tomorrow, Xie Lian exclaimed. The Tonglu area is open now, so we can head out any time we want. Hua Cheng quirked an eyebrow. Tomorrow? All right. He didn't object to the suggestion, nor did he speak more on the subject. A moment later, however, he flipped Xie Lian onto his stomach and climbed on top of him again. Maybe it was Xie Lian's imagination, but Hua Cheng seemed to work him even harder and more aggressively the second half of the night. It wasn't even 2 more rounds before he was forced to cry, Gaga, help me, and woozily pass out. See, it was not outside the realm of possibility to think that Xie Lian got nailed so good that he just, forgot 800 years. He might have slept soundly until the next morning, but not 2 hours later, Xie Lian felt a void next to him, even deep in slumber. He opened his eyes a slit and peered at the spot beside him, only to find the man that was next to him missing. Surprised, Xie Lian sat up at once, any drowsiness leaving him completely. After quickly making himself decent, he slowly rolled out of bed. As he pushed the door to head out, he wondered, where did Sen Lung go? This was the first time Hua Cheng had ever gone missing halfway through the night. Xie Lian searched all of Paradise Manor, but found no sign of him. Suddenly, he remembered that there was a room in the manor used for teleportation. When he went there, sure enough, the door to the room had been left ajar. The array on the door wasn't the same as the one he remembered from the last time he'd come here. And the cinnabar of the new array had yet to dry. Xie Lian went in without a second thought, and when he emerged, it was no longer Paradise Manor. Instead, there was nothing but darkness. Xie Lian closed the door and ignited a palm torch to illuminate his surroundings. When he took in the sight before him, he was shocked. The teleportation array was connected to an enormous, eerie cavern. It was the Cave of 10,000 Gods. Why had Hua Cheng come here all alone in the middle of the night? Didn't they agree to go together the next day? Why had he made this trip alone, in secret? Xie Lian shook his head. With torch in hand, he started to slowly walk the dim, chilly tunnels. His footsteps echoed hauntingly. The light silk veils covering the divine statues had been removed, so countless silent faces that mirrored his own stared out from the encompassing darkness. It was a somewhat terrifying sight, if he thought about it. When Xie Lian passed a cavern and glanced in absent-mindedly, he saw a divine statue of the god-pleasing crown prince. Its expression was gentle, and its form graceful as it stood there, flower in one hand and sword in the other. There were hundreds of divine statues here, if not thousands. Who knew how much time and effort it had taken to carve them, or how much time had been spent in this silent darkness? As he thought of that, Xie Lian let out a sigh. Approaching the statue, he inclined his head and murmured, "It must have been lonely, huh?" He was talking about the sculptor, but the statues as well. The god-pleasing crown prince statue nodded. Well, that was terrifying. Xie Lian remained frozen stiff for a while before he realized what had happened. Because he had been recharged with spiritual power very recently, the brimming abundance of it coursing through him had most likely affected the statues and made them move. Also, that proves that I wasn't wrong. In terms of being like, a major way to replenish his spiritual energy would be, Little vindication, I take it where I can get it. He quickly reined in his spiritual power, but it was too late. The god-pleasing crown prince had already taken a step forward. Although Xie Lian's overflowing spiritual power had affected the statue, he'd made no attempt to issue it any commands, so its movements were slightly awkward. It tripped and fell with a thud. "Careful!" cried Xie Lian as he rushed over to help it stand. After being helped to its feet, the divine statue's smile did not falter. It even lifted its chin with lofty dignity and nodded to him to express its thanks. Xie Lian couldn't help but find its haughtiness funny, but he held back his mirth. "Did you see Hua Cheng?" Xie Lian asked. Divine statues can make simple sounds, but cannot speak, except for representations of the silver-tongued gods who govern speech-related arts. When the god-pleasing crown prince heard his question, slight confusion colored its face, as if it didn't know who he was talking about. Xie Lian understood immediately. He hadn't met Hua Cheng yet at the period in his life depicted by the statue. Xie Lian reworded his question, "Have you seen a man dressed in red?" Only then did the divine statue produce a full smile, accompanied by an aloof nod. "Do you know where he went?" Xie Lian asked. After all, he wasn't familiar with this massive cavern, and he was afraid of getting lost. The statue thought for a moment before pointing him in the right direction. "Thank you, Your Highness," Xie Lian said. After walking along a stretch of road for a bit, he looked back. The god-pleasing crown prince statue had mastered the essentials of walking quite quickly, and it had started performing a sword dance right there in the road. Its form was divinely graceful, as though it were center stage at the Shangyuan heavenly ceremonial procession, dancing above a captivated crowd. Too bad there was no audience to appreciate its efforts. Not long after, Xie Lian hit another fork in the road. Without pausing, he entered the nearest cavern, ready to ask for help from another one of its statues. When he entered, he saw a figure sitting on the stone altar, hugging a liquor jug and vigorously chugging its contents. Xie Lian was speechless for a moment, then he dashed forward to snatch the jug away. "Stop!" he exclaimed. This divine statue was also made in his likeness, except with a thinner face and plain white robes, no longer extravagant. After Xie Lian took away the liquor jug, the statue tried to snatch it back, but its strength in its dazed state was no match for his own. Its attempts sent it spinning in circles, and then, suddenly, it clung to Xie Lian and began to cry in frustration. Xie Lian gaped. "There's no need for you to cry either." The statue sobbed even harder at this. It cried like a man with infinite problems. It stopped grabbing for the liquor and instead clutched Xie Lian and refused to let go. Xie Lian had no idea why he was so clingy when he got drunk. He had no choice but to hug it and gently rub its back. All right, he soothed. On second glance, Xie Lian realized that the liquor jug in his hand didn't have any alcohol in it, so it didn't matter if he returned it. He asked, "Have you seen a man dressed in red? Where did he go?" The divine statue pointed him in the right direction, and Xie Lian returned the liquor jug. As he continued on his way, the statue stopped crying. It sat back on the ground, hugging the jug, and drifted into dreamy distraction. Xie Lian looked back and let out a sigh, then moved on. After walking for a while longer, he heard a sound like the creaking friction of metal chains. He soon came upon a spacious cavern. A swing hung from the domed ceiling of the cave, and a divine statue was seated upon it. It was sprightly and filled with the air of youth, and it wore the cultivation uniform of a Royal Cultivation Hall disciple. This was probably him at 16 or 17. It was gripping the swing's chains and pulling on them hard to make it rock back and forth, but it kept failing because it was sitting on it. It wore a troubled expression, clearly upset by its plight. At the sight of this, Xie Lian went over to give it a push or two. The swing finally began to move, which made the statue in cultivation robes happy. Xie Lian took this chance to ask, "Have you seen a man dressed in red? Where did he go?" The statue in cultivation robes pointed in one direction, as his other hand still holding the swing's chain. Xie Lian gave it another few pushes before he said, "Goodbye, then." The swing rocked back and forth dozens of times, but eventually came to a stop once more. Without anyone to push him, the statue in cultivation robes sat there in a daze, and the troubled expression resurfaced on its face. "I should reach him soon, right?" Xie Lian thought as he walked on and on. Just then he heard a small voice that sounded like it was suppressing pain. Confused, he wondered aloud, "What's that sound?" Gasping. The voice was coming from a cavern just ahead. When Xie Lian went in, he saw a stone altar with what appeared to be a divine statue lying on top. A sheer white cloth covered it from head to toe and draped down the altar to brush the ground. The figure beneath the silk was writhing in shadowed contour, at times curling into a ball, at times tossing and turning. It looked like someone struggling painfully and suffering grave torment. Speechless, Xie Lian was just about to go over and pull off the white sheet when a hand reached out from behind him and covered his eyes. "Guga," sighed a low voice, also from behind him. Xie Lian chuckled. "Sanlong, do you think I didn't know what this is, even if you don't let me see it?" he asked gently. After a long silence, another sigh escaped Hua Cheng. "Guga, I was wrong." Xie Lian pulled down his hand and looked back to face him. "The land of the tenders?" The one standing behind him was a tall man dressed in red. It was, of course, Hua Cheng. Now that he had been caught, he raised one hand to hold his troubled brow. "Yes," he finally admitted. No wonder. If that's what it was no surprise that Hua Cheng wouldn't let him look at the statue. "You came here tonight hoping to hide this statue, didn't you?" Xie Lian asked. Hua Cheng's gaze shifted elsewhere as he answered, "Yes." Xie Lian didn't know whether to laugh or cry. Everybody take a sip. I'm kind of regretting mine. I tried a new chai tea. It's not really working. Was Hua Cheng really so afraid of letting him see it? "Why hide it?" he asked. "It's not that big a deal, really. But now we have a troublesome problem on our hands." The troublesome problem being that Xie Lian's arrival had unintentionally animated all the divine statues. It wasn't really too much of a concern, but to this statue in particular, it was an agonizing affair. Right! I probably should have put that together a couple of paragraphs ago, but here we are. For the sculpted idol beneath the silk cover was a depiction of the 17-year-old Xie Lian who had been poisoned by the land of the tenders inside that cave out in the wilderness. The other divine statues depicted sword dancing or drinking or swinging on a swing, all of that and more. This one, however, was the unfortunate representative of the time Xie Lian had been laid low by that dreadful flower Yao's poison. So when it came alive, it had to suffer the grave torment of the poison of desire. The agonizing gasping from under the sheer cloth was unbearable to hear. It forced Xie Lian's mind back to that harrowing, torrid night. "It's awful what it's going through right now," Xie Lian said. "If I leave, will it return to being a simple stone statue? If it did, it wouldn't need to suffer further torture." "I'm afraid not," Hua Cheng replied. "Guga, you're in pretty much your most powerful state right now. Every divine statue in the cave of 10,000 gods has been affected by you, and they will remain animated for a long time, even if you leave. It wouldn't be right to simply abandon the statue to its pain." "Then, is there any other way?" Xie Lian asked. Indeed, Hua Cheng was a man of ways. With a slight nod, he said, "I was just attending to this matter. Come with me, Guga." He led Xie Lian to a different stone cavern, and Xie Lian's eyes widened when they entered the room. Inside stood a stone sculpture of a man, tall and slender, with a handsome face and lips that curled slightly upward. An eye patch covered its right eye. This statue was an almost exact replica of the red-clad man who'd led him here. It was a Ghost King statue. We are not about to have two statues. Are we about to have two statues? I'm just going to keep reading. "This is," Xie Lian trailed off, "something I carved in a hurry when I realized things were going wrong," Hua Cheng explained. "I haven't sculpted in years, so I'm a little rusty. Guga, look. Does it look like me?" After examining it in detail, Xie Lian declared, "Very much so, but what?" Hua Cheng asked. Xie Lian grinned. "It doesn't look quite as good as the original. Guys!" Hua Cheng smiled as well. Then Xie Lian returned to the subject. "So, Senlung, the idea you mentioned was it to have this Ghost King statue help detoxify the divine statue poisoned by the land of the tenders?" After a brief silence, Hua Cheng's smile disappeared and his expression went serious. Looking Xie Lian in the eyes, he stated, "Yes." Xie Lian hadn't yet noticed the caution in his expression and thought, this idea is much too... Although it certainly was an effective way to get to the root of the problem, just the thought of it was absurd and ridiculously debauched. To put it bluntly, were they really planning on suppressing the poison of desire by using the Ghost King statue to take the virginity of his young divine statue? Honestly, it was hard to even talk about. We are here. Xie Lian was still at a loss for how to respond when Hua Cheng suddenly bent down on one knee in front of him. Taken aback, he quickly moved to pull him up. "Sanlong, what are you doing?" "Your Highness, I have been disrespectful," Hua Cheng said in a grave voice. Xie Lian couldn't get him to stand, so he crouched down as well. "How are you disrespectful?" he asked, puzzled. Hua Cheng only stared at him. After a few moments, he drew in a soft breath and said in the same grave voice, "Please believe me, Your Highness. I only conceived of this ill plan because I could think of no other solution. I take full responsibility for sculpting that divine statue, but I have never meant any disrespect or acted with the intent to profane Your Highness's likeness. If Your Highness feels this method is inappropriate, I will seek another solution." Yeah. At last, Xie Lian finally understood why Hua Cheng was acting solemn. He'd secretly carved so many divine statues of Xie Lian, and it must have always worried him that Xie Lian found his motivation strange and his behavior offensive. And now, considering his proposed plan, he was probably terrified Xie Lian would think that his mind was filled with nothing but obscene fantasies and disrespect. Isn't it, though? I mean, just a little bit. But it's not only filled with that. So, I mean, it's not only filled with obscene fantasies and disrespect. There is also, respect and perfectly respectable romantic fantasies, right? There's also that. But, I mean, let's be real. A smile crossed Xie Lian's face, and he let out a sigh. He grabbed Hua Cheng with both hands and finally hoisted him to his feet. "Of course I believe you. I know you've always respected me," Xie Lian said. However, Hua Cheng's insistence that he'd never acted with the intent to profane was harder to believe. After all, ever since Hua Cheng had returned after dissipating into silver butterflies, the man was adamant about profaning his god almost every other day, and he was only growing bolder as time went on. Xie Lian cleared his throat quietly. "This idea, there's nothing wrong with it. It's very good. Excellent." When he thought more about what the method entailed, his face grew hot. His words felt very immodest. But now that he'd received Xie Lian's permission, Hua Cheng slowly regained his usual ease. Xie Lian placed a hand on the Ghost King statue's shoulder. "Shall I give it my blessing?" Hua Cheng blinked and a smile slowly emerged on his face. "If Gaga wants to, that's more than I could ask for." So, in Modao Zushi, it was dream versions. And in this, it's statues? If there's like a video game version thing in Save System in one of the extra stories, we are going to officially learn something about MXTX. Where even am I? I don't even know. I don't know where I am in the book. I don't know where I am at this moment in time. I have no idea. I'm having way too much fun. Xie Lian nodded. Soon after, the statue lightly arched an eyebrow. As he withdrew his hand, Xie Lian couldn't help but smile at the sight. "Now it really resembles you." Several figures had slowly approached the cavern. Many of the divine statues had sensed something and come over out of curiosity, wanting to get a closer look at this new divine statue that was so different from them. The Ghost King statue also noticed them. It blinked, and its single arched brow arched higher. It seemed like it had some new idea, and was searching for something. It took some effort for Xie Lian to push his own statues out the door, coaxing and shooing them away. When he swept a glance back, he suddenly asked, "Where's the land of the tenders?" He was already using that name for the unlucky divine statue. Now, upon the stone altar, there was nothing but a sheer white sheet. Before anyone could notice, the reclining land of tenders divine statue had vanished without a trace. Oh no, Xie Lian thought. Hua Cheng, who had followed him over with his hands clasped behind him, frowned. Let's hurry to find it. The Cave of 10,000 Gods is massive. It shouldn't be able to escape very quickly, Xie Lian said. I'm afraid that's not... Sorry. I'm afraid that's not so, Hua Cheng said. Go, look. He pointed at the ground, and Xie Lian had to go around to see the circle array that had been carved into the rocky surface by a powerful finger. The teleportation array! It had somehow been able to draw a teleportation array with its bare hands. How much spiritual power had that divine statue drained from him? Xie Lian was going to collapse on the spot. That divine statue had been poisoned by the land of the tenders, you know. What if it escaped and offended passing mortal women? What sort of strange, lurid legends about him would spring from that? When did it escape, he asked. Where would it go? Don't panic, Gaga, Hua Cheng said. Think. Back then, if you had been poisoned by the land of the tenders, who would you go to first? That actually wasn't too hard to guess. Xie Lian wasn't all that anxious in the first place, so he swiftly calmed down. It would have been... An incoming line of spiritual communication interrupted him before he could finish. Caught off guard, Xie Lian raised his hand without thinking to answer the call. Feng Xin's voice immediately blasted in Xie Lian's ears. Your Highness, holy shit, I just saw a monster that's impersonating you. Just as Xie Lian expected. Back then, Xie Lian's most trusted aides were Feng Xin and Mu Cheng. They would have naturally been the first ones he'd seek if something like the poisoning incident happened. Thank goodness the divine statue had gone to Feng Xin first, instead of running through the streets. Xie Lian sighed in relief and quickly started to explain. No, that wasn't a monster, and it wasn't impersonating me either. Feng Xin was stunned. What do you mean? It's not a monster or an imposter. What, is it was really you? That can't be. That's not it either, Xie Lian cried. Anyway, how is it right now? Did you catch it? Don't let it get away. Too late, too late, Feng Xin said. It already took off. What? Oh, no, Xie Lian exclaimed. Yeah, oh no was right. Running around naked? How outrageous. What if people saw? Feng Xin said. Wait, what? Naked? It's not wearing clothes? Pretty much, Feng Xin said. It's wearing something, but not much. The little clothing that's there is all tattered, like someone ripped it up. If it's not a monster or an impersonator, then what is it? What's going on? It looked like a divine statue. Wait, a divine statue? He was suddenly horrified. It didn't escape from that place under the kiln, did it? What were you two doing? Xie Lian couldn't really remember how much he'd been wearing when he was suffering from the poison of the land of the tenders. He had been in a horribly uncomfortable state at the time, so maybe he'd stripped everything off in his delirium. I'll explain later, Xie Lian cried. I'll be there soon. He broke off communication and turned to Hua Cheng. Sanlong, we need to make a trip up to the new heavenly capital. Next to him, Hua Cheng had already collected the newly sculpted Ghost King statue and transformed it into a tiny little idol, small enough to be carried in one's palm. All right. With a few strokes, he drew an array, and the pair made their way directly to the new heavenly capital in no time. They made a beeline for the palace of Nanyang and saw Feng Xin as soon as they opened the door. When he came face to face with Hua Cheng, his eyes bugged out. We are really pursuing a living statue of Xie Lian at the specific moment in time in which he was inflicted with sex pollen for a somewhat fuck or die moment, so that we can keep the statue from doing harm to others and solve its problem by having a statue version of Hua Cheng plow it senseless. I'm just recapping for a second. I'm just to really solidify the concepts we're dealing with here. Uh. Ooh, one moment. I need some bad tea. Crimson Rain-Sought Flower? Feng Shen exclaimed in disbelief. How come you're here too? What are you doing up here? Outrageous! A supreme ghost king strolling into the heavenly capital whenever he wants, instead of staying in his proper domain. Hua Cheng ignored him. He listened intently for a moment before asking, "Where's the announcement? The upper court couldn't possibly be going back on its word now, could it?" Feng Shen knew exactly what Hua Cheng meant by announcement. In light of his service in saving the heavens and earth, the upper court had been forced to proclaim and exalt Crimson Rain-Sought Flower's heroic deeds for an entire year. The veins on his forehead bulged violently. "What announcement? It's the middle of the night," Feng Shen exclaimed angrily. "People need to rest too, you know. The announcement only happens during the day." Hua Cheng gave a non-committal, "Oh." That probably meant he wouldn't pursue the matter further. The matter further. I'm having too much fun. God, whatever, Xie Lian said. Let's get to the point. Where's the me you saw? Where did it go? It ran that way, Feng Shen replied, pointing in a direction. I was just about to give chase when the two of you ran in here. Xie Lian suddenly had a bad feeling about this. Question? That direction couldn't possibly be, Feng Shen answered simply, toward the palace of Xuanzhen. Let's go, Hua Cheng said in a dark voice. The two didn't dare delay. They made a beeline for the palace of Xuanzhen, then broke through the front doors and charged inside. Mu Qing was sitting atop the divine altar, stunned like he'd just seen something unbelievable. Jesus Christ. Okay, hang on. Let me do math real quick. Oh, not even. We can stand to go for another couple of pages, and then we'll have like a nice, easy time about it tomorrow in trying to actually get it finished, you know? Okay. Xie Lian went up to him and waved in front of his face. Mu Qing? Mu Qing finally came back to his senses when he saw Xie Lian. Nevertheless, his expression remained shocked. It took some time before he could manage to demand, Xie Lian, what were you doing? What was I doing? Xie Lian repeated. I don't know. Can you please tell me? Mu Qing glared at him. Why did you barge into my place in the middle of the night in a state of undress? Hua Cheng narrowed his eye, but Xie Lian only exclaimed, Don't phrase it so misleadingly. No matter what you saw, it definitely wasn't me. Mu Qing put this hand over his face, looking like he wanted to gouge whatever he had seen out of his eyes. Even if it wasn't you, it's got something to do with you, he rebuked with a steely expression. It's that divine statue from the cave, isn't it? What are you two playing at, letting an indecent divine statue loose and allowing it to run amok in the middle of the night? Do you and Crimson Rain-Sought Flower really need to play like that? Mu Qing fully calling out Hua Cheng and Xie Lian's sex games. Fully calling out their play. Oh... Hua Cheng scoffed. What's it to you? What's it to me? It's my palace, Mu Qing cried angrily. Well, I played a part in rebuilding the heavenly capital, Hua Cheng retorted leisurely. Mu Qing was speechless. It was true. The upper court had suffered catastrophic damage, and plenty of heavenly officials had to secretly ask for help from the master of Ghost City. Hua Cheng made quite a significant contribution to rebuild the new heavenly capital, and that was a fact. We weren't playing. It was an accident, Xie Lian explained. Where is it now? It stole a sword from me and ran off to... Mu Qing began, but Xie Lian knew where to go without him needing to say more. Clanking metal rang out from one of the Palace of Xuanzhen's outdoor gardens. The little Ghost King idol Hua Cheng carried with him hopped down on its own and hurried toward the garden in leaps and bounds. Xie Lian rushed to the garden, and sure enough, the land of the tender statue was standing atop the rockery. The divine statue's tousled clothing revealed large swaths of its smooth shoulders and chest. The clothing below the belt barely covered the essentials, making for an incredibly suggestive sight. The expression on the sculpture's face was also quite a feat of mastery. Its brows were tightly knit, and one could almost see the sheen of sweat and blush on its skin. It wouldn't be a lie to say it had been wrought by the devil's hands. It was using the sword it had stolen from the palace of Xuanzhen to stab itself with arduous effort, which was causing the loud clanking noises. It was trying to detoxify itself in the same way Xie Lian had attempted back then. Sorry, there's just something a little bit brutal about being reminded that that's how he tried to do that, considering certain things. That was a random ouch in the middle of absolutely ridiculous hijinks. However, the kiln stone from which it was wrought was formidable, so the sword couldn't penetrate no matter how hard the statue tried. The blade eventually bent with its efforts. As if it had lost all hope, the statue raised its hand. It was going to smash its own head to pieces. Calm down, calm yourself, Xie Lian hurriedly called to it. The divine statue turned its confused, hazy eyes toward him, and Xie Lian leapt up to deliver a slap of his own. The statue tumbled inside a hollow cavity of the rockery structure and lay immobile, unable to get up. Hua Cheng darted to Xie Lian's side and threw something down. It was the Ghost King statue. Or, rather than being thrown, it had actually struggled free of Hua Cheng's clutches as soon as it saw the statue of the young god. Once free of his grip, the Ghost King statue transformed back into its tall, slender, full-sized form as it sailed through the air. Then it dropped to land atop the divine statue. A surprised gasp came from below, and Xie Lian promptly jumped off the rockery. It's too late. Sorry, we're going to borrow your sacred garden for a bit, Xie Lian exclaimed as he pushed Mu Qing, who had rushed over at the sound of the commotion, back into the palace hall. Mu Qing was shaken. What were you guys doing? I'll explain some other time. Very sorry, Xie Lian said. What's there to apologize for? Hua Cheng asked, slowly and leisurely. You've saved this guy's life how many times now? No, you'd better lay it all out clearly right now, Mu Qing demanded. I saw you throw another you down there. He threw another him down, too, right? My eyes didn't deceive me. So what are you two up to? What's happening inside that rockery right now? Xie Lian was almost strangling Mu Qing in his attempts to drag him back inside the palace hall. This is urgent. Really, Mu Qing, don't go over there. Why must you push this? Xie Lian, Mu Qing roared. What are you two doing in my palace? What the fuck? What the actual fuck? It's not us, Xie Lian exclaimed. It was only an accident. It's really too late, and you've caught Function's language again. That's a scene break. Two hours later, the two statues finally exhausted all the spiritual power they had taken from Xie Lian and Hua Cheng. Xie Lian put his hand over his face the moment he went inside the rockery for a look. While Hua Cheng took care of the statues, Xie Lian went out wordlessly to stop Function and Mu Qing, who both wanted to see for themselves. You two don't want to see it, he said with the utmost sincerity. Function wasn't a curious person, so he wisely retreated the instant he got a bad feeling. Mu Qing, however, couldn't let it go. He flung his sleeves wildly and mumbled equally crazily, his face as dark as a pan's bottom. I can't believe this. I cannot believe this. Not only that a thing like this could happen in the first place, it just had to happen in my palace. And then he drifted away like a ghost. He would probably never be able to look at that rockery the same way again. Xie Lian highly suspected that he would chop it to bits with his bare hands after they left. To be honest, Xie Lian himself couldn't believe that he'd been the cause of such a funny, mortifying incident. He honestly didn't know whether or not he should feel embarrassed about all this. He turned his head to look at the two statues. No, they should now be No, they should now be called one statue? And asked, will they stay like that? Yeah, let them, Hua Cheng said. It's not like they can be separated now. Xie Lian covered his face. Now, we have one statue of Hua Cheng and Xie Lian in mid recharge. Okay. Okay. What heavenly official had statues in a pose like that? It'd be a disaster if anyone saw. It was too indecent and absolutely outrageous. Xie Lian groaned. Senlong, make sure that they're properly hidden. Don't let anyone see them. But of course, Hua Cheng replied with a laugh. Don't worry, Gaga. They brought the two as one statue back to the Cave of 10,000 Gods, and Xie Lian wiped the sweat from his face once it was finally returned to its place. The other Xie Lian statues inside the Cave of 10,000 Gods once again surrounded them, curious, but they were once again coaxed and pushed away by the real Xie Lian. Turn your eyes away from impropriety. Don't look. The statues had no choice but to leave. Although they didn't get to see the divine statue's new and final state, they all kept glancing back as they walked away, seeming very jealous that the land of Tender's Xie Lian finally got a companion. The land of the Tender's poison had certainly been neutralized, but all the other statues still seemed to be missing out on fulfillment of their own. There was no one to admire the god-pleasing crown prince, no one to lend a hand to the drunk, no one to push the swing. Xie Lian couldn't help but think greedily, if only every Xie Lian could have a Hua Cheng. Unexpectedly, Hua Cheng said the same thing aloud. Doesn't Gaga think it would be better if every His Highness had a Senlong by his side? The two clapped their hands together and immediately set to work, and a great manifestation of their abilities began to unfold within the Cave of 10,000 Gods. You are... Soon, Xie Lian had witnessed the entire process of how Hua Cheng transformed a large, heavy rock into an exquisite, expressive stone statue that seemed almost alive. It was impossible to describe his technique, since Hua Cheng moved so fast that Xie Lian couldn't even see how it was done. He assumed that Hua Cheng had long since merged his sculpting techniques with his spiritual ones, so all that remained for Xie Lian to do was watch in amazement. In any case, in the space of only a moment, Hua Cheng turned around and picked up a newly sculpted kid from a pile of debris. The boy had disheveled hair, ragged clothes, and bandages wound around his head. He looked sad and pitiful, and he clutched something in his hands that he refused to let go of. Xie Lian placed one hand on the little one's head and gave it his blessings, while Hua Cheng gave it a bit of spiritual power. Shortly after, it blinked and started looking around. When it found that someone was dangling it in the air by its collar, it lashed out with a brutal kick. Hua Cheng dodged easily, like he'd already anticipated the attack, and let it struggle and kick in his grip however it wanted. Xie Lian hadn't expected the little Hua Cheng to be so aggressive, and couldn't help but chuckle, oh my, so fierce. Hua Cheng clicked his tongue and tossed it away. The little one fell to the ground with a thud, but it quickly crawled back to its feet and glared at Hua Cheng with its eye flashing. Xie Lian extended a hand to it, worried that it might have fallen too hard. Senlong, you're too rough. Careful not to break it, he chided. In a way, this little one had just been born. No matter, Hua Cheng said nonchalantly. He's plenty resilient. The kid was vicious as hell toward Hua Cheng, but quite friendly toward Xie Lian. Xie Lian beckoned for... We heard that metaphor, am I right? Xie Lian beckoned for him to come closer, and he moved to do that. But just then the god-pleasing crown prince statue sensed something and descended from his position, gazing their way. The moment he saw the god-pleasing crown prince statue, the little one was stunned, frozen in place. His unbandaged eye widened, and he hurried over with thumping steps. He clearly wanted to grab the hem of Crown Prince's clothing and pounce on him, but at the same time he didn't dare get too close, lest he dirty his robes. It was a long time before he extended his arms very carefully and opened his stubborn little fists. There was a single tiny flower hidden in his hands. The God-pleasing crown prince gave the boy a small smile as he accepted the flower. Then he reached one hand out and picked the boy up, hoisting him up into his arms. The two left happily, just like that. One had finally found someone to admire his sword dance, and one had finally found someone to offer his flower. Why are we trying to make me emotional at the end of this? Why? How? Why would you do this at the end of something so absurd? Okay? Xie Lian felt relieved as he watched them, but a problem suddenly occurred to him. Senlong, after you're done sculpting everything, the cave of 10,000 gods will be filled with so many of our divine statues. Will they begin to mistake who belongs with who? So many of them look alike, after all. They won't, Hua Cheng replied with a broad smile. Why not? They won't, Hua Cheng repeated with confidence. He raised his eyes to gaze at Xie Lian, still smiling. Even if your highness mistakes me, I would never mistake your highness, because a Hua Cheng will only be the believer of a single highness. He is faithful to his one and only. It will never happen. Xie Lian met his gaze with equal intensity. I would never mistake you either, he blurted. There will only ever be a single most devoted believer for a Xie Lian. I will always remember that. He trailed off, suddenly rather embarrassed by his declaration. The two of them were like children, eagerly promising each other. Oh, stop that. Equally promising each other, you'll always be the one I like the very best. While it was sincere, it was incredibly juvenile. And while juvenile, it was incredibly sincere. After a brief silence, Xie Lian cleared his throat softly. So then, next, let's help the Royal Highness on the swing by sculpting a Lord Ghost King to push him. It looked so very lonely and sad without anyone to help push. Sure, Hua Cheng replied happily. And then what about the drunk one? Xie Lian asked. That one's a little troublesome. It seems utterly confused, not to mention it cries. Gosh, there are too many divine statues here. I wonder how long it'll take before all the Ghost Kings are carved. Why worry? Hua Cheng asked with a smile. There's no rush. They'll all meet eventually. Xie Lian also smiled, and then he nodded. They will all definitely meet, he said softly. Inside the stone cave, the two once solitary statues were joined as one. Their gazes and bodies were entangled endlessly in their tight embrace, both staring with rapt adoration at the other face mere inches from their own. They were truly forever inseparable. What? What kind of... And you haven't even seen the art. I haven't even shown you the art yet. Look at this art. Look at it. Look at it. Mm-hmm. Who? How? What do you even... I don't... Sick and twisted. She's sick and twisted. She's so unhinged. And she's so unapologetically unhinged. I don't know what the fuck you want from me. Like, what? This is where we're stopping, because it's a little after 5, but, you know, we got there. This is where we're stopping. We'll have a nice, easy time of it tomorrow. The last story, the fifth story, is on page 283, which is technically chapter 140, and it's called The Ghost King's Birthday. That could be a lot of different things. That could mean a lot of different things. That could go a lot of different places. But that's what we're reading tomorrow. I think it's 283. It's only like 30 pages. So tomorrow's stream will probably be more like an hour and a half. Somewhere around there. Maybe even a little bit less. So tomorrow will be a short one, and then the one after that, the grand refathoming, the debrief or what have you on Wednesday, it could be half an hour, it could be 2 hours. I don't know. I'm not really putting a time limit on it except for the usual one of 2 hours. So who can say? So it might be a couple of short streams after that before we break for the holidays, before picking up Save System in January. So that is it for today. That was the wildest fucking how she brings it around for a genuine nice little emotional end moment there. That wasn't too much, but was just enough to kind of end on a nice little feeling after all of that hilarity. She's not right. She's just not right. So we will be back here tomorrow to do the last extra story and probably end early. I hope you had a good time. I had a damn blast. I will be back tomorrow. You guys have a wonderful rest of your day, weeknight, what have you. And please take care of yourselves. And I will see you tomorrow.